On the 1st of August 1976, the Montreal Summer Olympic Games reached their finale. It was just like any other Olympic Games. It was full of triumphs and heartbreak and its fair share of controversy. To nobody's surprise, the Soviet Union sat pretty at the top of the medals chart after accumulating a total of 125 gold, bronze, and silver medals, taking home 49 gold medals. By this point, the Soviet Union had well established themselves as the creme de la creme of the sports world, often battling tooth and nail with their main adversaries, the United States. But when the final medal count was tallied, it was not the United States, the global superpower with a population of 218 million in second place, as it often found itself, but rather a much smaller European nation with a population of only 17 million. That nation was the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany. They managed to obtain a total of 90 gold, bronze, and silver medals, taking home 90 gold medals. And with West Germany in fourth place, one could honestly say that the Germans were doing very well, which was surprising because only 26 years earlier they were beaten to a bloody pulp and left to die during World War II. But despite these accomplishments and victories, not everything was as it seemed. Little did anyone know that behind the scenes something very sinister was going on. A massive state-sponsored doping operation was taking place in East Germany. Revelations about the scope and extent of this operation would not come to light until years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and even with these revelations, this is a topic that is still very rarely discussed even to this day. And while short-term victory was achieved, the long-term consequences of sustained doping at a very young age had a catastrophic impact on millions of athletes. Why did the East German government risk the health and well-being of their athletes by giving them excessive amounts of anabolic steroids, human growth hormones, and blood boosters? The answer was simple. The East Germans were attempting to forge a new national identity and encourage a sense of unity through the glory of sports. But to understand why this nation walked down this dark and twisted path, you first need to understand how East Germany came about in the first place. It all began on May 8th, 1945. The Second World War in Europe came to an end. The German capital city of Berlin, along with the rest of the country, was divided into two parts, East and West Germany. The East Germany was occupied by the Soviet Union, while the West Germany was occupied by the United States and Western Europe. However, this divide was simply metaphorical at first. East and West Berliners and Germans were allowed to move amongst each other. Well, that changed on the morning of August 13th, 1961, when millions of East Germans and East Berliners awoke to find their section of the city and nation barred by barbed wire, machine gun nests, and makeshift barricades. Over the next few days, what became known as the Berlin Wall was constructed and erected. To the people of East Germany, the wall represented the deepening division of the German nation in terms of culture, politics, and philosophy. Many families were torn apart by the Berlin Wall, and despite its intimidating facade, an estimated 787,000 people attempted to escape over, dig under, or walk through gaps in the wall to escape the harsh and oppressive life of East Germany to the safety and comfort of the West. Many died in the process. This mass exodus became a major existential crisis for the East German government. How could they say that they were a united and content people living in a socialist utopia while so many were attempting to escape? The East German government needed a way to solve this situation, and what better way to do it than forging a new national identity, and what better way to create one than through the glory of sport? The beginning of the East German doping program perfectly coincided with the construction of the Berlin Wall. In 1961, a man by the name of Manfred Ewald became the East German Minister of Sport, a position that he held onto until the collapse of East Germany in 1989. There is no other person who is central to this story and the development and execution of this doping program. In 1969, the government of the German Democratic Republic passed a directive that was known as Das Leistungssport Bellschutz, or the list of sport, which divided all of the sports the East German athletes competed into one of two categories, Sport 1 and Sport 2. Sport 1 included swimming, athletics, weightlifting, marathon running, and generally any other sport that was deemed noteworthy on the global stage, while Sport 2 were any other sports deemed less noteworthy, things like archery, marksmanship, and karate. All available finances were funneled to the disciplines and activities that the East German government believed could prove as an effective propaganda tool and help them outshine their Western neighbors. At first, the performance enhancing drugs were optional. They became first available to the male athletes in 1966, and 2 years later, in 1968, female athletes were given the option of taking performance enhancing drugs. Even children, some as young as 12 years old, were given the choice of anabolic steroids, methamphetamines, human growth hormones, and blood boosters. However, the choice of German athletes taking performance enhancing drugs came to an end in 1968 when the East German athletes from the Summer Olympic Games in Mexico City with a total of 25 medals, including 9 gold medals. Not terrible for such a small nation, but in the eyes of the East German government, this was too small of a number. It did little to spread the message of an East Germany that was mighty and demanded to be taken seriously. It was at this point the mindset of doping in East Germany went from, would you like to take this pill to help your performance, to, you are going to take this pill to help your performance. And with State Plan 14.25, a secret directive that was launched in 1972, it was about to take doping in East Germany to levels like never seen before and to levels of utter insanity. But the results spoke for themselves. 4 years after the 1968 Mexico City Olympic disaster in 1972 in Munich, West Germany, the East Germans won a total of 66 gold medals. That figure had doubled to 132 by the time of the Moscow Olympics in 1980. This was not an operation that was being carried out by a few rogue coaches giving their athletes some dodgy pills. This was a well-organized and well-oiled operation that everyone from the coaches to the highest levels of the East German government were complicit in. But there was trouble afoot. In 1962, the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, approved methods of doping detection. As a countermeasure, the East Germans doubled their efforts to stay one step ahead of them. This resulted in the creation of the Unterstützte Mittel, or Supportive Means, the Group, a clandestine organization of doctors, scientists, and pharmaceutical companies that were tasked with improving the effects of doping, the distribution of performance-enhancing drugs to athletes across the country, and the prevention of positive doping tests during international competitions. Anabolic drugs came to the forefront at this point in time, more specifically anabolic steroids known as oral Trinol. They were produced by a state-owned pharmaceutical company, Genopharm, a company that is still around to this very day. It is estimated that over 2 million doses of synthetic testosterone were given annually to 2,000 East German athletes, with 10,000 becoming doped throughout the entire program. Despite the extensiveness of the doping program, the first East German athlete to fail a drug test during an international competition did not occur until 1977, when 20-year-old Jelena Slupnek tested positive for steroids at the European Cup in Helsinki, Finland. She ended up being banned for a year, but she returned to competition in 1980, winning a gold medal at the Olympics in Moscow. Although it has never been confirmed or denied, it is believed that she returned to East Germany during her ban and continued to dope, this time under more closer supervision and more careful guidance. It was also speculated that she managed to set 2 shot putter world records while still under the influence of steroids. So how did so many East German athletes evade detection when there was a mandate that every athlete doped? This was achieved through three major ways. The first way was athletes were given epitestosterone to keep their hormone levels within the IOC sanctioned levels. If this treatment for whatever reason did not work, dirty urine was swapped with clean urine for samples and everyone would pass. The second way was that every athlete was tested before heading to overseas competitions. If any athlete's hormone levels were too high, that individual would be removed and another athlete would take their place under the guise of a last minute injury. And the third way was through simple intimidation. The East German secret police, also known as the Stasi, had over 2 million agents, informants, and collaborators at their disposal. They kept a very close eye on doctors, coaches, athletes, and their families. Anyone who was suspected of stepping out of line were threatened to keep their mouths shut or suffer the consequences. Not even children were safe from the mandated doping. The East German government officials often scouted youth sporting events, and the very best of these children were given more advanced training at sporting centers far away from home through intense training regimens that borderline on the abusive. Whether if athletes knew what they had been taking has long been debated. Former East German athletes have testified that during their training sessions, they were coerced into taking what trainers simply called vitamins. But there were those who undoubtedly knew full well what was going on and were complicit in it. However, it is doubtful that many East German athletes knew the true extent and scope of the program, and for many, that wasn't a concern. For growing up and living in East Germany was a harsh and brutal reality, and sporting excellence was the only avenue for personal growth. The option was clear: take the drugs and strive for glory, or don't take the drugs and return to the brutal reality of the German Democrat Republic. Choosing the latter could impact your job and education prospects, your aspects to better housing and owning a car. If you went against the system could ruin your life. By the 1980s, a deep suspicion over sport had settled in East Germany. The Western jokes of East German weightlifting women sporting a 5 o'clock shadow and having deep masculine voices were not too far off, and some serious questions were beginning to be openly asked, but then it was all over. In November of 1989, the Berlin Wall came crashing down and ended the nightmare that was the East German Democrat Republic. And doping? What doping? It was not that simple. With the unification of Germany and the opening of the Stasi files, the world began to learn about the East German doping program. And despite these revelations coming to light, thousands of East German athletes were suffering. Many were shells of their former selves. They suffer from a multitude of conditions: heart disease, hormonal problems, depression, mood swings. Women have experienced long-term consequences such as infertility and masculinization due to excessive use of anabolic steroids. Young men who were track and field runners received injections of steroids in their knees in the hopes of building stronger leg muscles even before they reached puberty, and found themselves crippled and unable to walk by their 20s. They demanded that their stories be heard and justice be served. In 1990, the Central Investigations Office for Government and Reunification Crimes, or the ZERV, began an investigation into the alleged existence of the East German doping program and its crimes. Over 1,000 former East German athletes were invited to testify. It only took 300 testimonials to provide the court with enough evidence to confirm the existence of the most massive doping operation in modern history, and that major crimes were committed because of it. However, the punishments that were handed down by the court were rather lenient, to put it nicely. Manfred Ewald was found guilty and convicted as an accessory to the charge of intentional bodily harm to athletes, including minors. He was eventually given a 22-month suspended sentence in 2000, as was Manfred Hoppner, who was the head doctor who was responsible for the doping program. This verdict caused outrage throughout Germany. They were furious that these two men seemingly perpetrated crimes against humanity and got nothing more than a slap on the wrist. This has been the outcome of the many cases that have been brought against former coaches and administrators by former athletes. And while Germany has given the illusion of being willing to try those responsible for the state sponsored doping program, it has long stopped short of actually holding those people fully accountable. In 2006, 167 former East German athletes received roughly $1,200 apiece from the German government. And in 2016, a fund of $13.65 million was set up and has yet to be doled out. The International Olympic Committee has also shown very little to no interest to right the wrongs of the past. No medals have been stripped from East German athletes, and even though every one of them was cheating, those results still stand to this day. And world records during those years will never be beaten. There has been a massive outcry by many former athletes who feel that they are battling an unjust system. The legacy of the East German doping scandal still hangs over the world of sport to this very day, as we have seen similar programs emerge out of Russia, first in 2008 and more recently in 2019. A German charity called the Doping Victims Assistance has dealt with more than 2,000 cases of former East German athletes suffering from physical or mental issues related to doping. And even more tragic, more than 200 athletes fear that their children have been affected by the East German manic drive for medals, with disorders including club feet, organ deformation, deformed hands, and deformed limbs. If ethics were treated with the same fanaticism as sports, the world would be an amazing place to live in. However, sadly, that is not the case. The sins of the past and their horrors are still very much alive.